Hey guys, it's Ben Seong from Australian Strength Performance, and today I will be sharing with you something really special. As requested by you guys, I will be sharing a live seminar. Now, these live seminars are held monthly on our online learning platform, learn-asp.com. So, here's the seminar today. It is on body composition. I will be talking a little bit more about hormones, understanding how body fat affects your ability to absorb nutrients as well, and looking at a range of other variables that could affect the way you look and potentially the way you feel. Today, the first video will be on the first 4 points, and then next week we'll be running into the last point as well as going through a lengthy Q&A where I will delve into a lot more depth of what I talk about. Okay, so I'm going to start today with talking a little bit more about body composition. So here are 5 things that I want to alert you guys or let you guys understand a little bit more about body composition. Now, if you haven't considered this before, maybe this should be what you should be looking at with regards to body composition. Typically, when we look at a body composition protocol, it's a very straightforward protocol with regards to calories or caloric intake. So most people would obviously look at what is your amount of calories that you're taking in from the foods that you are having or the drink that you are having, and obviously what are the amount of calories that you will be burning through the day. This would be easily being put through a basic formula that you can typically find online. And a lot of these formulas may be involved in sort of calorie apps or calorie trackers to be able to understand the calorie balance or the energy balance of what goes in and what comes out. Now, we all know that it works. There is no doubt that calories are extremely important in this sort of body composition equation. But at the same time, I want to point out a few other factors that I need you guys to consider, because sometimes the body will hit a wall. Now, the first, I guess, calling for the body is adaptation. The body is made to adapt. Adaptation is often seen as a very negative thing. So typically when you guys work out or you train, when you plateau, you call that a negative thing. You want to break past that plateau in order to progress on a continual basis. So plateau is not a thing that you want to hear. But if you think about it from an evolutionary point of view, a plateau is the adaptation of your body to a given stimulus. And if your body can adapt to a given stimulus, that means it is extremely effective in doing so, right? It's very effective, and the effectiveness of your body in adaptation allows it to survive. So the survival instinct of your body is continually being played through whatever you do, whether it's nutrition, whether it's training. The faster your body adapts to a stimulus, this is when you need to change things up. Your body can adapt to a caloric stimulus. If you give your body 2,000 calories, for example, after some time, your body will adapt to it by saying, this is my base calorie. This is what I'm taking in. In order for me to change my body composition, so whether you want to put on more muscle or you want to lose more fat, something has to change. That means whether it's your proportion of macronutrients, you're changing your carbs, fats, proteins, or you're changing your caloric count. Maybe you should drop your calories. Maybe you should increase your calories. So a lot of you would have been exposed to concepts of manipulating numbers and macronutrients in order to change your body composition. This point down here, my first point, is regards to hormones within the body, and has nothing to do with calories. Hormones play an important part in how your body starts to regulate nutrition. And I don't think that we give it enough weight when we look at nutrition through a caloric lens. The point being, when you look at any sort of body composition, there are 2 main hormones that we really want to understand: insulin and cortisol. These 2 hormones are being spoken a lot about, but I think the significance of it is underplayed because a lot of people understand a theoretical meaning of insulin and cortisol, but it may not carry over into sort of a practical understanding. And my role is to give you a better understanding, a better practical understanding of what insulin and cortisol can actually do to your body. So really quickly, insulin is a storage hormone. Insulin is a hormone that is being released by your pancreas, and your pancreas will regulate basically if there is too much sugar in your blood, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin would basically take the sugar and store it. Typically, the body stores it in the muscle cells, the skeletal muscle, it stores it in the liver. And if, for example, there is excess sugar that the body does not need at that point of time, then the excess sugar tends to be stored in the fat. All right, so that's the typical function of what insulin does. Within the skeletal muscle cells, the liver cells, as well as the fat cells, there are specific receptor sites called GLUT4 or GLUT4 receptor sites that bind to insulin. So these are what we call insulin-dependent receptor sites. And this only reacts towards insulin. So can you imagine when you're taking in sugar, for example, and there is a increase or a surge of blood sugar in your body, these insulin is basically being released as a response to that. And as insulin is being released, it activates these receptor cells to draw in the sugar in specific muscle tissues. So we're talking here about skeletal muscle, your liver, as well as your fat cells. Now, if, for example, we understand that you are taking in a lot of sugar, then insulin would rise really quickly, and that would take the sugar and it will start to store it in the body. For an individual, typically that has a poor body composition. So if my person that I'm working with has a high amount of body fat and a low amount of muscle mass, then this person has a tendency to store more sugar within the fat cells itself rather than the muscle cells. Why am I pointing this out to you guys? Because if you're looking at a client, or maybe yourself, it may be a client that you're training, and this person has a high high level of body fat with regards to body composition. If, let's say, this person is taking more sugars or carbs within their diet, then there is a high likelihood that this person will be storing a lot more of those sugars within the fat cells itself rather than the muscle or the liver, which is where you want to first store glycogen in. So insulin has an important role to play in distributing the nutrients. However, if a person has poor body composition to start off with, then that may be an issue because the way insulin deposits the nutrients is going to be disproportionate. For someone who has a poor body composition, insulin is going to distribute nutrients more within the fat cells as opposed to the muscle cells or the liver cells. So that could definitely be a problem. So insulin should be a factor of consideration when it comes to body composition. Now, cortisol is the other hormone that we need to understand. And cortisol is a stress hormone. If a person has more body fat on the body, typically this is what we need to understand. In today's society, because of the large amount of toxins within our environment, a person with a higher level of body fat also tends to be someone who is more toxic. The reason being, your body fat is a buffer to store the excess toxic load that we are taking in from the environment. Now, toxins can come from a whole range of different places. We know the air that we breathe in is definitely not clean. There are a whole range of different types of toxins that we're exposing our body to from the air. Now, on top of that, we shower with tap water, and every country's tap water is regulated differently. So we will be taking and exposing our bodies to a whole bunch of toxins, from xenoestrogens all the way to petrochemicals, to chlorine, and a whole bunch of other chemicals that we take in through our skin. So we breathe it in, we absorb it through our skin, through the chemicals that we rub on our skin, the perfumes, the foods that we take in, and we are more toxic. The ability for a person to detoxify depends on the health of the liver. However, if, for example, you are overloading your body based on the environment, because our environment is very toxic, then the tendency is you would store these toxins within your fat, because a lot of toxins are fat soluble. So typically nowadays, especially nowadays, the fatter the person, the more or the higher the toxic load, hence the higher the stress levels of the individual. So here again, we're talking about cortisol. Cortisol doesn't just reflect the stress levels of a person, it also adds to the stress levels of the individual. That means the higher the cortisol within the body, the more fat the individual will put on. So cortisol as a stress hormone can actually directly relate to fat storage in the individual. In fact, we know from research and science that a high cortisol profile is also an individual that will start to store more fat around the belly region, in front of the tummy. So, for example, if you've been an individual that have worked out for some time and you've tried numerous diets and you really work out, you push yourself, but you always have fat on the lower belly, then you have to start to reflect to see whether it could be cortisol that you're exposing yourself to. And again, when we're talking about cortisol, most people tend to think, hey, is cortisol just a stress hormone from overtraining? Is it a stress hormone from mental stress, physical relationship stress? But we understand that cortisol is a hormone that is being released irregardless of the source of stress. So it doesn't matter whether your stress comes from a physical aspect, or is it just an emotional aspect or mental aspect. Stress could also come from the types of foods that you take in. And this is where that relationship with cortisol and nutrition is so important, because as people in the fitness industry, we always rely on numbers. Our reliance on numbers means that if I get the app that allows me to key in certain numbers that reflects my intake of calories, I'm okay. So that means I can be flexible in my diet. That just means that if some days I want to eat junk or whatever it is, I can. Now, there is no reason to say you can't, because from a caloric perspective, sure, it works out. But from a nutritional perspective, is too much of what you're taking in going to impact your gut? And if it does, and if stress increases the hormone cortisol, does that mean you're also going to put fat, irregardless of the amount of calories that you put into your body? The answer is yes. So that's why cortisol needs to be considered for optimal body composition. But this is very interesting. And what we understand is that modern day diseases, a lot of the diseases that we see nowadays, are man-made diseases. Our environment is stressing our body out more than ever, and the stress that we are facing in our everyday environment is prolonged stress. It is not intermittent stress that comes in once in a while. It's not like, hey, I'm running away from a lion that is threatened to eat me, and so that's a immediate stress, fight or flight. I run away, and then after that, the lion disappears, and I'm okay. It's not that sort of stress. It's a stress that compounds you every single day. We are stressed from the electromagnetic field, from your computers, from PowerPoints, from plugs, from the lights that you see, which are fluorescent light, LED lights that actually they definitely stress your body out, from the foods that we take in, that we assume that so long as we don't die from the foods that we take in, our body is safe and we're okay. But little did we know that there is a build-up of cortisol over a period of time that will affect us. So we live now in such a state where we consider the now, right? So if I eat something and it doesn't affect me immediately, I'm okay in eating it. If I do something and it doesn't affect me immediately, I'm okay with eating it. In fact, it was very interesting. I was speaking to one of my clients yesterday, and one of the things that really resonated with a statement that I made myself was that when we look at health nowadays, the concept of health is the absence of sickness. Think about the statement. Health is seen as the absence of sickness. This is how we see it nowadays. Now, let me ask you something. For those of you that are hearing this, is health just the absence of sickness? So if you're not sick, you're considered healthy. This is how the medical industry views you. That means you're not sick, there shouldn't be anything wrong with you, you are healthy. But is that actual health? It's like saying, for example, if, for example, you are not extremely poor, you're rich. Does that make sense? If you're not extremely poor, that doesn't mean that you may be extremely rich from a physical perspective. Now, we're not talking about from a metaphorical level. That could mean that there are many levels of richness to actually become rich. What exactly is rich? There are many levels of health to call someone healthy. And very much so, all the diseases that we see nowadays, 70% of the man-made diseases can be attributed to an imbalance between insulin and cortisol in your body. Type 2 diabetes, for example, is a disease that is man-made. It is a disease made on the fact that we have exposed our body to too much processed sugars, foods that has regulated our insulin on a regular basis every single day for multiple times a day over a period of time, so much so that our body builds up a resistance towards understanding insulin, and this becomes insulin resistance, which is diabetes. Now, typically when you look at a diabetic person as well that's type 2, you would see that they have more body fat than what the body needs, typically because there is a dysregulation with insulin. Similarly with cortisol, the more stressed the person is, the more catabolic the body is. The body breaks down. Now, if the body breaks down, it manifests itself in a whole range of diseases, not just from a body composition perspective, but diseases itself that when you go to a hospital, they're not able to tell you what exactly is wrong with you. So, but for a body composition perspective, I think to start off with, it's extremely important to consider the impact of insulin and cortisol within a client or yourself. So you need to be considering factors on what are you eating that is causing your insulin to spike up on a regular basis. If you want to change your body composition, then even though your caloric count may be on point, your insulin spiking may not be on point. Look at the foods that you're having through the day. Do they cause your insulin to spike on a regular basis? Because if they do, then making sure that they don't can help you lean out significantly. Very similarly to cortisol, if those foods that you take in irritate your gut, they cause bloating, they cause flatulence, then is it better that you take in those foods, even though from the caloric perspective, you're saying, yes, it's great for me. If you took it off, would it help you change your body composition? It absolutely will. Okay, one of those foods that you need to consider is protein powders, because protein powders have a very high tendency to bloat people up, to cause flatulence. In fact, bodybuilders are known to have protein powders and have what we call protein farts, right? So when they fart, it absolutely stinks, and they kind of laugh it off, saying, hey, it's a protein fart, it's too much protein. Yes, it is, but it typically is typified of refined protein that you're taking in that your body doesn't handle well. It stresses your gut out. In the long term, you will tend to change your body composition based on cortisol itself. So an important factor to consider. The second factor we want to talk about today is the variance of body fat. Here's a protocol that you guys need to understand. In order to put on muscle effectively, you need to be of an optimal body fat percentage. And I've given you some examples here of the pictures that you can see on the screen. You would see that from my point of view and from an anecdotal perspective, so working with clients, typically for my guys, if they are 12 to 15% body fat on a DEXA, roughly it looks like that. So this body down here is about 15% on a DEXA. For the female, 15 to 18% on the DEXA scan. Now, the DEXA scan is a golden standard that I go by because it's probably the most accurate scan. It is more like an X-ray because there are, that's why they'll tell you probably don't go and do a DEXA scan too often because there is radiation with a DEXA scan as opposed to your in-body or other types of Tanita scales that you use to measure yourself. A lot of those are not accurate. Okay, so I repeat, they're not accurate. You shouldn't use that as a golden standard. It can give you an indication, but I think a lot of people base their body fat percentage and muscle mass on those kind of scales. But if you look at these pictures, for example, the male down here is roughly about 15% on the DEXA, and so is the leaner female physique down here that is also at about 16% on the DEXA. Now, you might look at that and go, isn't the female a lot leaner than the male? How is she, the same sort of percentage? Because if you're looking at body fat, it also takes into account the lower half. And typically, if I were to lift the shorts of this particular male, you would see his legs are extremely lean. Where he stores more fat will be around the belly. So you see his belly is a little bit softer around the lower belly, which is where we know that this could be an issue of cortisol as well. The female here is a lot leaner on the upper body. Whole upper body might look a lot leaner, but she might hold more body fat on the lower half, typically characteristics of females as well. If you are between these two body fat percentages, then the ability for you to put on muscle with your nutrition and store fat is optimal. That means you're able to put on more muscle and you are able to store less fat. Now, remember, when food goes into your body has to distribute the nutrients. So your body typically distributes the nutrients to certain cells. We talked about it just now, right? So your insulin will rise based on the carbs and the sugars and the foods that you take in. And your body would tend to store that ideally in the skeletal muscle, as well as the liver, and a small proportion in the fat. This happens in individuals that are highlighted in the green down here. So these are the leaner individuals. And from my experience in working with body composition, I tend to find that these percentages, 12 to 15 for the male, 15 to 18 for the female, are the ideal percentages where that happens. Once it crosses those body fat percentages, then if the individual is on whatever diet the individual is on, my goal is not to put on muscle for them anymore. It is to lean them out. Because if I continue to keep them on their diet and to go, okay, you do whatever you need to do, I'm trying to put on muscle for you, the distribution of nutrients in their body is it goes the opposite way. That means the body starts to store more fat, more nutrients within the fat and the liver and less in the muscle. So that distribution switches over. So if your body fat is very, very high, let's say it's 25% or above, then I would aim to lean you out if you were looking for a muscle building protocol. This is my point. So you know how clients come to you and go, I want to build muscle. Well, if you are holding on to a lot of body fat, then I will not need to increase your calories to put on muscle. In fact, I will decrease your calories and you still can be effective in putting on muscle. This is for an individual with a higher body fat percentage. For an individual that is extremely lean, let's say you are 10% and below, then in order for you to put on muscle, I cannot just keep you on an isocaloric nutrition. That means keeping your calories the same or dropping it. I actually have to increase your calories for you to put on muscle. Now, notice when I increase your calories, you will put on muscle. A small amount will still be distributed to your fat cells because they still respond to insulin, but it's a minute amount and most of it will go into your skeletal muscle cells, some in your liver. Okay, so a very lean person, in order to put on muscle, I have to up their calories. For a person with a high body fat percentage, I can in fact drop their calories and they can still put on muscle. All right, so understand the difference. And this slide there is basically to give you an idea of the difference in body fat percentages and what you need to do with it. So this is where the exception of the rule comes in and you're going, okay, can I actually lose fat and build muscle at the same time? Yes, you can at a higher body fat percentage, but at a lower body fat percentage, you can't. You actually have to up your calories. All right, so understand the differences there. Now, the third slide is going back to calories. If you need to drop your calories or you need to change your caloric count, what protocol should you use? How much should you drop it by? There is no strict or fast rule or hard or fast rule down here to say you need to drop it by a certain amount. But people typically like to do an all or nothing approach. That means they would hit this head on and they will go, hey, I'm on 3,000 calories today. So in order for me to lean out, I'm going to drop myself down to 2,000 calories to start off with. Now, that's a huge drop in calories. And that often can be a problem because such a huge drop in calories could also mean a massive change in your energy levels. And it's no wonder why people start to crave more foods because you have just decreased 1,000 calories worth of nutrients into your body. And there is a massive void that your body is having. So typically when I'm looking to decrease calories, there are a couple of strategies that I would use. The first strategy before I even drop calories is to keep calories. So if my client wants to lean up based on, let's say, a 2,000 calorie diet, I don't immediately drop calories for the individual. I look to substitute macronutrients. So for example, if you're on a 2,000 calorie diet, instead of dropping your 2,000 calorie diet to 1,800 calories, I will keep you on a 2,000 calorie diet, but I would change and drop your starchy carbs, drop it by a certain amount, and the amount that I drop your starchy carbs by, I would increase the same amount with your protein. Say I drop starchy carbs, I increase protein with the same amount. The reason why I do this is because from a caloric perspective, protein and carbs have the exact same amount of calories, right? So it's 4 calories per gram. But what we understand about protein and carbs is that your body burns protein and carbs very differently. Why? Because protein is a very tightly packed and a dense molecule. That means your body utilizes a lot more energy to break a protein molecule down. Now, because it utilizes so much energy, a large part of that caloric intake is actually used to break down protein itself. All right, so understand that, say, for example, if you took in more protein, your body would have a larger caloric output. So the total amount of calories that you're absorbing in is actually less. So if I gave, say this person was at 2,000 calories, and I dropped their carbs and I increased their protein, and I still kept it at 2,000 calories, the output of the body of that individual is going to burn a lot more than the individual on a high carb diet. So the first strategy I always use is to increase protein and drop carbs. Same amount, so the overall caloric count doesn't change, but I modulate that amount to make sure that they've got enough protein and still some carbs in their diet, but I drop it and increase it at the same amount. Now, as I increase the protein, I also want to make sure that I increase the fiber that the individual takes. And if I can put some salt in there, whether it's colored salt or not, it's irregardless. It is some sort of salt, because salt will tend to curb the cravings, carb cravings, if you have a higher protein sort of diet. Okay, so that's important. So the first strategy I always use is keep calories. Now, if I were to drop calories, then what do I typically do? Obviously you want to drop it first from carb sources for body composition perspective. Why is that the case? Because insulin is the one hormone that I always consider. So if there's any areas that I want to modulate, insulin would be sort of the first areas, whether insulin or cortisol, which one that I target first, would be one of these areas that would affect how the body changes. So I would target insulin, and I would typically drop carbs from these particular areas. So we're looking here at sauces. We're looking here at sweet foods. We're looking here also at starchy carbs eventually. So I always cut out what I can first. Remember, if you take something out, ideally you want to substitute it, right? If the change is a big change. If it's a small change that you're going, okay, I know you're taking a lot of tomato sauce, and I just want to make sure that you drop tomato sauce. Maybe you can use some fresh tomatoes instead. So there has to be a substitute, but if you're dropping tomato sauce, and tomato sauce has a lot of sugar, that's why I talk about sauces that people don't realize, you are significantly taking out a proportion of refined sugar that goes with their food. Some people, though, you would have to drop fats. And these are the people that are really your I would say your keto warriors, right? These are the people that have subscribed to the new way of eating, and they've gone fats necessity for the body. They're great for me, and so my diet is extremely high in fat. I start off the day with a bulletproof coffee and butter, and I have bacon, and I have avocados, and all that kind of stuff. Now, as much as I like to support fat, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. So if you can have 3 handfuls of nuts a day, and sure, it's healthy for your body, but healthy doesn't equate having an optimal body composition. And this is what they need to understand. That means you can be still as healthy without having 3 handfuls of nuts. You can still be as healthy having 1 handful of nuts and cutting out the excess calories from fat, because at the end of the day, that's going to get you fatter. So fat will be the second area that I would address. Now, the third area I would address is to up the workload. So if I keep calories the same, but I want to lean them out, then what I could also do is turn up the dial on the activities that they're doing in order to increase the calorie output. But in doing so as well, I have to make sure that workload is turned up very gradually, because again, individuals tend to be an all or nothing. They always want like an all or nothing approach. In the first week of training, for example, or starting a new approach, they're full on, head in first. They would do the best that they can. They buy the best foods. They would try to cook everything they can. In fact, they wouldn't want to use any sort of spices or make the foods tasty. They would rather boil it and put themselves in a little prison and say, I just got to eat this way. But we know that that's all really short-lived. because the more they tax their body, the more stress there is. The more stress there is, the more they turn to food and they start to binge. So when you turn up the dial on the workload, that means you get them to train more. I do it extremely slowly, and this could mean adding a set within their workout. This could mean adding, 15 minutes of a walk within their day, increase the number of steps that they take. And I do it very gradually over a period of time, so much so that it doesn't tax the body. But there is a gradual increase in the workload that the body demands. As a result of that, they will lean up, because if calorie comes in, calorie comes out, if that equation is being met, and I'm turning up the dial on the calorie out part of the equation, they will lean up. There is no doubt about that. But the key is, again, too much of a good thing. If you start to throw everything all in at once, then you would start to stress their body out. And in doing that, they will build up more cortisol. And in building up more cortisol, they will start to put on more fat in the body. So this ties in with my next slide down here. And this is what we call a pregnenolone steal pathway. Now, I don't want to go too much into the science of what is going on within your body from a chemical perspective with regards to cortisol, but I do want to explain a few things. And that is within this chemical pathway called pregnenolone steal, okay? Pregnenolone is the main molecule. It's like the mother molecule. It provides the raw materials for your body to create testosterone and estrogen. So you see the word pregnenolone, you start to see the arrows moving down into estrogen and testosterone. Some of you may have heard of the intermediate hormone called DHEA. If you're in the bodybuilding circle, you would have been familiar with this term DHEA. So pregnenolone creates estrogen and pregnenolone creates testosterone. That's the mother molecule. And that's important to understand because for males, you obviously want a good amount of testosterone in your body. So you need a good amount of pregnenolone in your body as well. For females, you want a good amount and an optimal amount of estrogen in your body because that does everything from regulating your cycle, that helps you to build muscle, that helps you to tolerate carbs better, that helps to regulate your system and fat loss. So it does a whole range of things, which is critical because the moment you lose your estrogen for females within your system, then the body goes out of whack. When your estrogen gets disrupted, then your ability to lose fat is being hampered. Your period starts to stop. You stress out. You could have hair loss. A lot of females will experience hair loss when they start to compete for a competition because the estrogen values are being disrupted. How are your estrogen or testosterone levels being disrupted? It is through this particular pathway that you see how pregnenolone moves to the left to become progesterone, and progesterone becomes cortisol. So pregnenolone is not just the mother molecule of testosterone and estrogen. It is also the mother molecule that makes cortisol. So isn't this interesting that from a chemical perspective, this one particular substance, pregnenolone, can basically convert its raw materials to make cortisol or testosterone and estrogen, which are your dominant sex hormones. Your body only has a finite amount of pregnenolone at any one time. That means you have a certain amount. If you start to stress out, let's say you start to do too much activity in your training, too much activity or too much cortisol, what it basically does is it drives the pathway towards the left. So in this particular slide, you see it drives the pathway towards increasing cortisol. If the pathway is increasing cortisol, then what amount of pregnenolone do you think will be left for testosterone and estrogen? A small amount. So the body would down-regulate the production of testosterone and estrogen because its first purpose is now to create more cortisol in the body because you are highly stressed. So stress could come from too much activity, right? We are very addicted to activity in the gym. A lot of people are addicted to training more, but not necessarily training better. Guys want to get that pump. They might stay in the gym for 2 hours to achieve a pump. Females feel that if they stay on the cardio machine, the longer they stay, the better it's going to be. So some of them will stay for 2 hours on the cardio, increasing it every single day. Some of the females will go for classes all the time. You go for one class after another, and they are serial class addicts that will go to classes and stay there throughout the whole day. But they take pride in that emotional connection with the activity that they're doing. And for them, more equals better. From a scientific and chemical perspective, a physiological perspective, this is not what your body is seeing. More equals larger amount of cortisol production. And you see, the way I draw cortisol is a smack right in the middle of a tummy of an individual. It looks like a turtle down here, but it's really a fat person. So when you look at cortisol, the idea of what cortisol does is it increases within, and it starts, this is what it does. It starts to strip the amino acids, the proteins within the arms and the legs, and it feeds it to the gut. So you typically will see an individual with more fat around the belly, and their arms and their legs will start to get skinnier. Now, this becomes a real problem if you're looking for an optimal body composition, right? I mean, if you're suddenly at a big belly and skinny arms and legs, you kind of look like ET. So we call it CEO syndrome because a lot of CEOs, are highly stressed at work, and this is how they look like. They always have a big gut and really skinny arms and really skinny legs, and this would be the effect of prolonged cortisol exposure. Cortisol is a very necessary and important hormone in your body. You do need it, but a prolonged exposure to cortisol is not a positive thing because it drives everything towards storing fat, changing your body composition, but taking away from testosterone and estrogen. Now, remember, testosterone and estrogen are highly anabolic hormones as well. So females will need estrogen to build muscle. Males will need testosterone to build muscle. If, for example, you do not have them, then guess what happens? You do not effectively put on that muscle within your body itself. All right, so you become more catabolic. In saying that estrogen is needed to build muscle, what I mean is that it's there to create the optimal environment for that to happen within the female. Remember, the genes of a female and a male is extremely different. They react and they utilize different chemical reactions in the body. They need specific hormonal environments in the body in order for the body to function properly. In order for a female to change her body composition effectively, her cycle needs to continue throughout the month. The cycle is a sign that their body is functioning properly. And the cycle is regulated by optimal amount of estrogen. If that estrogen value drops and their cycle is dysregulated, then their ability to lose fat as well as obtain maximal muscle and body composition is going to be affected. So in that sense, estrogen is important for putting on muscle within the female itself. All right, so understand the relationship here, and what you guys need to understand is that from a body composition perspective, too much work is not necessarily a good thing because it starts to strip away the raw materials needed for you to create a muscular or optimal environment. So this is point number 4.
Guys, thank you for watching today's 4 points on body composition. Make sure that you tune in to the next video where we're covering point number 5, as well as a lengthy Q&A that will delve more into how to apply these particular variables. So stay tuned and we'll see you then.